Welcome back to Face the Nation. South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg is one of the 24 Democrats running for president. He's 37 years old, and if he wins, he'd be the youngest president ever. He'd also be the first openly gay president. We caught up with him on the campaign trail in Virginia. You faulted Democrats in a speech this week for kind of not having much of a strategic foreign policy for the past few decades. What do you mean by that?
I think that it's been difficult, even confusing, to figure out what our foreign policy is because Democrats became so absorbed in opposing whatever the Republicans were doing. Now, often rightly so. What the Republicans were doing was often terrible, but we got so sucked into that. For example, take the Iraq War, which I opposed as a student and continue to think was a terrible idea. We were so horrified by the way that democracy promotion was done at gunpoint then that it very nearly made our party into isolationists, when actually we've often been the ones who believed in more international engagement. And so
you would fault Joe Biden, who you'll be standing on the debate stage with, for his vote?
Well, I certainly think that vote was a mistake, and I have a different view on that conflict. But it's more than any individual vote or any individual conflict. It's what worldview is going to anchor our approach. We're not going to be able to figure out who we are as Democrats by keying off the Republicans and just deciding when we're against it and when we're going to accommodate it. We have to have our own view. And I think our own view needs to be based on the idea that American interests, American values, and American relationships all need to fit together. And it's very clear that the U.S. is adrift. I would argue under this administration, the U.S. does not have a foreign policy. Maybe an approach, but the approach is not pretty. It involves coddling dictators. It involves blaming fellow Americans for a lot of the problems we have around the world. And it's no substitute for a policy in which the U.S. is leading. We can either lead the rest of the world or we can resent the rest of the world. We can't do both.
President Trump said if a foreign government offered him information on his opponent, he'd listen. He said it's just like opposition research. What do you think of that answer?
We're talking about foreign interference in American politics. And by the way, this isn't hypothetical. This isn't theoretical. We were attacked by a hostile foreign power that decided that they could damage America, destabilize America by intervening in the election to help him win. And they did, and he did, and now America is destabilized. If you believe in putting this country first, how could you ever talk about allowing a foreign, potentially hostile foreign power to interfere in the most sacred thing that we have in our civic tradition in America, which is our elections?
He said he'd listen before he considered reporting it.
Is
there a scenario in which that's acceptable?
Just call the FBI. It's not hard. It's not complicated.
When you've been asked about the president and the Mueller report, you said that if you are elected, that you would consider pursuing obstruction of justice charges.
It's not up to the president to pursue charges. This is the thing.
So
I absolutely believe that there are plenty of reasons to think that there may have been illegal behavior, and prosecutors should look at that. And no one is above the law. Not a president, not a former president, no one. I also believe that the last place you look for guidance on how to conduct a prosecution is to the Oval Office. The less our law enforcement and prosecution has to do with politics, the better.
So when some of your competitors say that there should be obstruction of justice charges pursued, you're saying you're not endorsing that?
There should be a Department of Justice that can think for itself. There's tons of evidence that would point to an obstruction investigation. I'm just saying it shouldn't be ordered up by the president.
You look at a Buttigieg Justice Department potentially prosecuting the president, former president. Would you ever consider a pardon?
I don't think that it's appropriate for pardon power to be used to cover for malfeasance or corruption in office. Right now,
Ford's pardoning of Nixon?
I don't know what I would have done in the 70s and that historical counterfactual, other than that I'm bothered by the possibility that public corruption went unpunished. And the idea that that could happen in the future is equally problematic.
Do you believe the Trump administration when it says that those attacks on tankers that happened this week were conducted by Iran?
There is certainly concern that this is consistent with a pattern of malignant behavior by Iran. What I'm also concerned about is that this appears to be part of an escalation where this administration might be leading us on a path to war that could get away from this White House very quickly. Look, it is nothing new for Iran to be acting in destabilizing ways in their region. We see it quite a bit. The question is, what are we going to do to make things more stable before the situation becomes uncontrollable?
So what would you do?
Well, first of all, engage our allies. We are not alone. At least we shouldn't be acting alone. And if we want to see stability in the Middle East, we should be engaging with our partners there, as well as allies like our European partners, who are such an important part of the Iran nuclear deal. And by the way, another thing I would never have done is to get us out of the nuclear deal, setting off a chain reaction that has destabilized the regional security framework and the politics of that area, and making it that much harder for any moderates that are still in the Iranian regime to get anywhere, because they look foolish for having staked their careers on the idea that you could trust Americans. We need to have a completely different approach. And when the same people who led us to the war in Iraq, like the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, are now apparently guiding our policy toward Iran in the White House, it makes you wonder whether we can really take this president at face value when he says he doesn't want us to go to war.
You also said you would rejoin that nuclear accord with Iran. But the UN watchdog, the IAEA, has already said that Iran is ramping up its production of nuclear fuel. There are bans on arms that are going to expire right on the precipice of the election and shortly after you'd be entering office. So is that really a viable alternative?
We're going to have to do something new. The point is that we never should have left it in the first place.
So you want new negotiations and a new deal with Iran?
Look, any negotiation is going to have to meet the needs and the realities of the moment. Unfortunately, the moment we're in is one where the United States' influence in this region has diminished because of the way that we have withdrawn. So what we're going to have to do is re-engage with our partners, re-engage with anybody who has an interest in stability in the region, and do whatever we can to once again meet the objective of stopping Iran from developing nuclear capabilities, which is exactly what that deal was doing. Even this administration certified that that was the case.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your time.
Good to be with you.
The full interview is on our website at facethenation.com. We'll be right back with a look at where the 2020 field of Democrats stand in the primary season.